The peaceful Calorian Empire had ruled over 17 star systems for 3,000 years without firing a single shot in anger. Their philosophy of harmony and understanding had brought prosperity to dozens of worlds where gentle, herbivorous creatures lived in crystal cities that gleamed like jewels against alien skies. They had mastered medicine and terraforming technology that could turn barren rocks into garden worlds, but they had never needed to master the art of war. Ambassador Zethara stood in the communication chamber of her flagship, watching in horror as the latest reports came in from the outer colonies. The images on the holographic display showed something that no Calorian had ever imagined in their darkest nightmares. Massive organic ships the size of mountains were descending from space onto the peaceful world of Kelter Prime. Their hulls pulsed with a sickly green light and smaller creatures swarmed around them like antibodies defending a diseased organism. The Vakari swarm had arrived without warning or demands for surrender. They simply began consuming everything in their path. The bioships landed in the crystal cities and started dissolving the beautiful structures with streams of acidic secretions. The peaceful inhabitants tried to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The creatures were everywhere, processing organic and inorganic matter alike into a gray nutrient paste that they fed back to their larger vessels. Zethara watched in sick fascination as one of the bioships literally grew larger before her eyes. Its hull expanded as it absorbed more matter, and she could see new weapon ports forming along its surface like tumors. The thing was not just consuming the colony, it was using the consumed matter to make itself stronger and more dangerous. High Counselor, these ships are not like anything in our databases, her science advisor reported from his station. The creatures appear to be part machine and part living organism. They reproduce by consuming matter and converting it into new bioships. At their current rate of expansion, they will have doubled their numbers within 6 months. Zethara felt her people's ancient pacifist beliefs crumbling as she watched entire populations being processed into organic slurry. The Calorians had always believed that any conflict could be resolved through negotiation and understanding, but these creatures showed no interest in communication. They simply consumed everything they encountered. Like a plague of living locusts. How many worlds have they taken? Her military advisor asked, though the Calorians had never had much use for military thinking before this date. 12 systems in the past month, the science advisor replied, and they show no signs of slowing down. Our projections indicate they will reach the core worlds within 6 weeks. Zethara closed her eyes and tried to center herself using the meditation techniques her people had practiced for millennia, but when she opened them again, the images of destruction were still there. The Vakari were methodically working their way through Calorian space, consuming everything they found and growing stronger with each world they devoured. Have we tried to communicate with them? She asked, though she already knew the answer. We have broadcast on every frequency. We know and used every diplomatic protocol in our databases, her communications officer replied. They do not respond to any attempt at contact. They simply continue their consumption pattern. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was ending his shift at the Deep Space Communications Array. The massive installation orbited beyond Pluto, constantly scanning the galaxy for signs of intelligent life or threats to human space. Morrison had been monitoring alien communications for 5 years, but he had never encountered anything like the signal his equipment detected that night. The transmission was heavily encrypted and came from a source over 200 light-years away. Morrison's translation computers worked for hours to decode the message, and when they finally succeeded, he stared at the screen in disbelief. The signal was a desperate plea for help from a species he had never heard of. This is Ambassador Zethara of the Calorian Empire broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. The message began. We are a peaceful civilization facing extinction from an unknown enemy called the Vakari swarm. These creatures consume all organic and inorganic matter to fuel their expansion across the galaxy. We have no military capability to resist them, and our population numbers in the billions. Morrison felt his blood run cold as he continued reading the translation. The message included detailed technical specifications about the enemy vessels and horrifying footage of worlds being literally eaten alive. The creatures in the images looked like something from a nightmare, all writhing tentacles and pulsing biomatter that dissolved. Everything they touched, our medical databases and terraforming technology, are offered freely to any civilization willing to provide military assistance. The message continued, but we must warn you that the odds of success are minimal. The Vakari swarm numbers over 3 million vessels and no known species has successfully resisted them for more than 6 months. Morrison immediately forwarded the message to Admiral Kate Sullivan at Terran Fleet Command. The Admiral was known throughout human space as a brilliant tactical mind who had never lost a battle. Her response came back within an hour, and it was exactly what Morrison had expected from humanity's finest military leader. All fleet commanders report to Luna Base immediately. Sullivan's message read: activate Protocol 7 and prepare for full fleet mobilization. We have a situation, Admiral. Sullivan stood before the holographic display in the main briefing room at Luna Base, studying the tactical information that the Colorians had provided. The assembled fleet commanders represented the best military minds that humanity had produced, men and women who had spent their careers preparing for the day when Earth might face an existential threat. Gentlemen and ladies, Sullivan began, her voice carrying the authority of absolute command, we have received a distress call from a peaceful alien civilization that is facing genocide. The enemy appears to be a parasitic species that consumes entire worlds to fuel their expansion. Colonel Ryan Harper of the Terran Marine Corps leaned forward in his seat. Admiral, what kind of numbers are we looking at? Sullivan activated the tactical display showing the Vakari fleet positions over 3 million enemy vessels, each one a living weapon capable of self-repair and reproduction. The aliens estimate that we would be facing odds of approximately 60 to 1. The room fell silent as the assembled officers absorbed this information. Captain Rodriguez, commanding officer of the UN's Vengeance, was the first to speak. Admiral, those are impossible odds. No fleet in history has faced anything like this and survived. Dr. Lisa Chun, the fleet's chief xenobiologist, had been studying the biological data that the Colorians had transmitted. The enemy appears to be a true hive-mind organism, she reported. Each individual vessel is connected to the others through some form of quantum entanglement communication. They can coordinate attacks across vast distances with perfect efficiency. Sullivan nodded grimly. Doctor, how long do we have before these creatures reach human space if they finish consuming the Colorian Empire based on their expansion pattern? Chun replied, approximately 18 months. They consume resources exponentially, so each world they take makes them stronger and faster. The Admiral looked around the room at the faces of humanity's military elite. She could see the fear in their eyes, but she could also see something else, the stubborn determination that had carried the human race from caves to the stars. Ladies and gentlemen, Sullivan said quietly, we are going to do something that every tactical manual says is impossible. We are going to take our entire battle fleet across 200 light years of space, and we are going to pick a fight with an enemy that outnumbers us 60 to 1. Colonel Harper stood up from his chair. Admiral, with all due respect, why would we risk everything for a species we've never even met? Sullivan smiled grimly as she looked at the images of Colorian civilians being consumed by the alien swarm. Because, Colonel, that's what we do when someone calls for help, you answer. And these creatures represent a threat to every living being in the galaxy. If we don't stop them here, they will eventually come for us. The orders went out within hours, and across human space, the greatest military mobilization in the species history began. Massive dreadnoughts launched from orbital shipyards around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. Cruisers and destroyers formed up in battle groups, while supply ships, loaded with ammunition and provisions, prepared for the longest military campaign humanity had ever attempted. Jake Morrison sent the reply to Ambassador Zathara, using the same quantum transmission frequency that had carried her desperate plea. Help is coming, Ambassador. Humanity has never backed down from a fight, especially when innocent lives are at stake. Hold your positions and prepare for our arrival. 2 days later, the human battle fleet departed Earth space, heading toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of 2 civilizations. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as hyperspace enveloped the assembled ships. She knew that many of the brave men and women under her command would not be coming home, but she also knew that this was Humanity's greatest moment, the day when they proved that the human race would never stand by and watch genocide happen, when they had the power to intervene. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sara Prime solar system, and Captain Alex Rodriguez immediately knew they were walking into hell. The view screen of the UNS Vengeance showed dozens of massive organic shapes moving through space like living asteroids, each one pulsing with bioluminescent veins that cast an eerie green glow across the darkness. These were the Vakari bioships, and they were already beginning their assault on the peaceful world below. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison from his position at the communications console. "There must be 50 of them, and each one is the size of a city." Rodriguez stood from his captain's chair, his jaw set with determination. "All ships battle. Stations form attack formation Delta 7th. Human fleet moved with practiced precision, 12 heavy cruisers and 40 destroyers, spreading into an aggressive spearhead formation that would have made any military academy instructor proud. But Ambassador Zethara, watching from her sanctuary ship in orbit around the Sara Prime, could barely understand what she was seeing. "Captain Rodriguez," her voice came through the communication channel with obvious confusion, "why are your ships not forming defensive positions around our world? The Vakari will overwhelm you if you attack them directly." Rodriguez smiled grimly as weapon systems across his fleet came online. "Ambassador, defense is for when you're protecting something behind you. We came here to kill Bugs, the first Vakari bioship to detect the human fleet was a medium-sized creature that resembled a massive jellyfish with tentacles trailing for miles behind it. It immediately began broadcasting chemical signals to alert the rest of the swarm, but Commander Sarah Blake was already moving her destroyer squadron into position. "All destroyers target the lead the bioship with nuclear torpedoes," Blake ordered from the bridge of her flagship. "Fire on my Mark 40 nuclear warheads." Streaked through space, their bright trails cutting through the darkness like deadly stars. The Vakari bioship tried to evade its massive bulk, undulating through space with surprising grace, but the human weapons were too fast and too numerous. The explosions lit up the void as nuclear fire consumed the creature's organic hull, sending chunks of burning biomatter spinning in all directions. Ambassador Zethara watched in amazement as the humans pressed their attack. The Calorians had always believed that warfare was a last resort, something to be avoided at all costs, but these humans fought with a cold efficiency that was both terrifying and inspiring. Incoming transmission from the planet's surface. Morrison reported Vakari ground forces have landed in the southern continent. They're moving toward the civilian evacuation sites. Colonel Ryan Harper was already suiting up in the Marine Bay when the report came through. He turned to his men, 2,000 of the toughest fighters humanity had ever produced, and saw nothing but determination in their faces. "Listen up, Marines," Harper said, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years of combat experience. "The Bugs think they can just walk onto this world and start eating innocent people. They're about to learn why that was a mistake." The first wave of Marine dropships launched from the human fleet, streaking through the Sara Prime's atmosphere like falling meteors. Harper watched through his helmet display as the planet's surface rushed up to meet them, green fields and crystal cities, giving way to areas of blackened earth where the Vakari had already begun their consumption process. The dropships landed in a coordinated pattern around the largest Vakari ground force, and Harper's Marines poured out with weapons ready. The first thing that struck him about the enemy was their size. Each Vakari warrior stood nearly 10 feet tall with chitinous armor that looked like it could stop anything short of a tank. "Round there, bigger than the intelligence report suggested," Sergeant Dan Cooper observed, raising his plasma rifle. Harper grinned behind his helmet's faceplate. "They're just big bugs, Dan, and we're really good at pest control." The battle that followed would be talked about for generations among both humans and Calorians. The Vakari warriors, accustomed to facing civilizations that fought defensively, found themselves completely unprepared for humanity's aggressive tactics, where other species would form defensive lines and wait for the enemy to attack. The humans charged forward with weapons blazing. Harper led from the front, his powered armor allowing him to move at incredible speeds while his heavy weapons cut through Vakari chitin like paper behind him. His Marines advanced in coordinated fire teams, using every piece of cover available. While maintaining constant forward pressure, Cooper, take your squad left and flank those warriors near the Crystal Spire. Harper ordered over. The Combat Communication Network. Foster, I need you to set up a heavy weapons position on that ridge. Everyone else with me. The Vakari tried to adapt to the human tactics, but their hive mind thinking made them predictable. They would mass for a coordinated charge, only to find that the humans had already moved to new positions and were cutting them down from multiple angles. Meanwhile, in space, Captain Rodriguez was learning just how tough the Vakari bioships really were. The nuclear torpedoes that had destroyed the first creature were having less effect on the larger vessels, their organic hulls seeming to absorb and distribute the damage across their entire structure. Sir, the main hive ship is moving toward us, reported his tactical officer. It's bigger than anything we've ever seen. Rodriguez watched as a creature the size of a small moon began to separate itself from the main Vakari formation. Its surface was covered with what looked like webs, each one glowing with the same eerie green light as the smaller bioships. All cruisers, concentrate fire on that thing's forward section. Rodriguez ordered Blake, bring your destroyers around and hit it from the flanks. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Railguns and plasma cannons sending streams of destructive energy across the void. But the hive ship's response was devastating. Streams of acidic biomatter erupted from its weapon ports, eating through the armor of 2 destroyers before their crews could even react. Commander Blake saw her ships being destroyed and made a decision that would become legend among human naval forces. Her own destroyer had taken heavy damage, its hull compromised and life support failing, but she still had one weapon left that the Vakari hadn't counted on. All crew to escape pods. She ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. I'm going to show these bugs what happens when you mess with humanity. Blake sealed the bridge and manually overrode the ship's safety systems, pushing the engines far beyond their design limits. The destroyer accelerated toward the hive ship, its nuclear reactor beginning to overload. As she aimed for what looked like a control center on the creature's surface, the explosion when her ship hit was visible from both space and the planet's surface below. The hive ship reeled from the impact, a massive section of its biohull torn away by the nuclear detonation. For the first time since the battle began, the Vakari seemed uncertain on the ground. Harper's Marines had cleared the immediate area around the evacuation sites, but they could see more Vakari forces moving in from the horizon. The colonel activated his long-range communications gear and contacted the fleet. Admiral Sullivan, this is Harper. We've secured the primary objectives, but we're going to need reinforcements if we're going to hold this position. Sullivan's voice came back strong and clear. Help is on the way, Colonel. The experimental weapons division has some new toys they want to test on these bugs. As if summoned by her words, a new group of human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. These vessels looked different from the standard fleet ships, bristling with experimental weapon arrays and carrying the latest in human military technology. Dr. Lisa Chen aboard the lead research vessel had been working around the clock since the first distress call from the Calorians. Her xenobiology team had been analyzing every piece of data they could gather about the Vakari, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited. Captain Rodriguez Chion's voice came over the fleet communication network. We've identified a potential vulnerability in their neural network systems. If we can disrupt their hive mind communication, it should make them much easier to defeat. Rodriguez smiled as he watched the experimental ships take position around the enemy formation. Doctor, you have permission to test your theories. Let's see what happens when we cut these bugs off from their queen. The battle for the Sara Prime was far from over, but for the first time since the fighting began, the humans felt like they had a real chance at victory. The Vakari had expected to face another pacifist civilization that would crumble under their overwhelming assault. Instead, they had run headfirst into humanity's greatest strength, the absolute refusal to give up when innocent lives were at stake. Ambassador Zethara watched from her sanctuary ship as human reinforcements continued to arrive, and she finally began to understand why these strange creatures from Earth had answered her people's desperate call for help. They fought not because they enjoyed violence, but because they could not stand by and watch others suffer when they had the power to intervene. Admiral Kate Sullivan arrived at the Sara Prime with the largest human battle fleet ever assembled and immediately established a joint command center on the planet's surface. The temporary structure rose from the crystal plains like a metal fortress, bristling with communication arrays and defensive weapons, but inside the command center tensions ran high as human military doctrine clashed with Calorian philosophy in ways that neither species had expected. Ambassador Zathara stood before a massive holographic display showing the approaching Vakari Armada, her delicate features pale with fear. "The main swarm fleet will arrive in 72 hours, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 million bioships led by a queen ship. That dwarfs anything we have ever seen. Our evacuation fleets cannot move fast enough to save even a tenth of our population, Admiral." Sullivan studied the tactical display with cold, calculating eyes that had seen too many battles to count. "Evacuation is not an option, Ambassador. We're going to make our stand here, and we're going to win but the casualties." Zathara protested. "Your own projections show that 60% of your forces will be destroyed in the first engagement alone. How can you speak so casually about the deaths of hundreds of thousands of your people?" Sullivan turned to face the Calorian diplomat, her expression hard as steel. "Ambassador, with all due respect, you called us for help because you needed warriors. We don't calculate acceptable losses the same way your people do. When someone needs saving, we do whatever it takes." Dr. Lisa Chen looked up from her research station where she had been working non-stop for the past 48 hours. Her xenobiology team had finally made a breakthrough that could change everything, but she needed more data to confirm her theories. "Admiral, I need access to the Calorian medical archives, specifically their research on hive mind species." The request sent a ripple of discomfort through the Calorian delegation. "Those archives contain sensitive information about our pacifist neighbors," Zathara said carefully, "information that could be used to create biological weapons." Chun's patience finally snapped. "We're not here to create weapons of mass destruction. We're here to save your people, but we can't do that if you won't trust us with the information we need." The argument that followed revealed the fundamental differences between the two species. The Calorians valued moral purity, even in the face of extinction, while the humans were willing to use any means necessary to protect innocent lives. It took Captain Rodriguez's intervention to break the deadlock. Ambassador Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "Your people are going to die if we don't have that information. All of them, every man, woman, and child on every Calorian world will be consumed by the swarm unless we find a way to stop them." Zathara was quiet for a long moment, then slowly activated her personal access codes. "The archives are now open to your research team, Captain. But I pray to our ancestors that we are making the right choice." Chun dove into the Calorian data with the intensity of someone who knew that millions of lives hung in the balance. What she found confirmed her worst fears and her greatest hopes. The Vakari were not just a hive mind species. They were something far more dangerous, a collective organism that could adapt and evolve in real time, but that same adaptation process created a critical vulnerability. Captain Ben Davis, commanding the stealth ship Ian's Shadow, had spent the last week mapping Vakari fleet positions and gathering intelligence. His ship had crept through the outer edges of their formation, invisible to their biosensors, but what he discovered made his blood run cold. "Admiral, the main queen ship isn't just commanding the fleet," Davis reported from his hidden position. "It's actually growing new bioships from its own mass every hour. It gets bigger and spawns another dozen vessels." Sullivan absorbed this information without changing expression. "How long before the main fleet arrives at our position?" 60 hours at current speed, Davis replied. "But Admiral, there's something else. The queen ship is broadcasting some kind of psychic signal that's driving the smaller bioships into a feeding frenzy. Any organic matter they encounter gets consumed and processed back to the main vessel." Chun looked up from her research station, her eyes bright with discovery. "Admiral, I think I know how to stop them, but we're going to need to get very close to that queen ship." Meanwhile, Colonel Harper was implementing Operation Hornet's Nest, a series of fortified positions designed not to stop the Vakari advance, but to slow it down and gather crucial combat data. Each position would be sacrificed to buy time and information for the main battle. Lieutenant Amy Foster found herself commanding the forward position on Kepler 7, a small moon that offered excellent sensor coverage of the approaching swarm. Her orders were simple: hold the position for as long as possible while transmitting tactical data back to the main. Fleet Foster watched through her armor sensors as the first wave of Vakari bioships approached the moon. Their organic hulls pulsed with that familiar green light, and she could see smaller creatures swarming around them like antibodies in a bloodstream. All units, this is Foster, we have visual contact with the enemy. Estimated 30,000 bioships approaching from multiple vectors. Stand by for engagement. The battle for Kepler 7 lasted 6 hours and became a textbook example of human tactical thinking. Foster's Marines had turned the entire moon into a fortress, using its natural cave systems as bunkers and its mineral deposits as raw materials for improvised explosives. When the Vakari finally overran the position, they found that every inch of ground had been bought with blood and explosives. Foster's final transmission before the position fell would be remembered as one of the defining moments of the war. Tell them we held the line for as long as we could, and the data we gathered will help them win this thing back. On the Sara Prime, Chun was putting the final touches on her analysis of the Vakari neural network. The hive mind communication system that made them so dangerous also made them predictable, but only if they could find a way to map the quantum entanglement patterns that connected individual bioships to their Queen Commander Morrison. This is Chun. I need you to take the Lightning on a reconnaissance mission into the outer edges of the Vakari formation. We need to plant quantum sensors on at least 3 different bioships. Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the massive enemy fleet and shook his head. Doctor, that's a suicide mission. The moment we get within sensor range of those things, they'll swarm us. Jung met his gaze steadily. Commander, every position we've lost, every Marine who has died has been to gather the information we need to win this war. Are you telling me that their sacrifice was meaningless? The Lightning launched an hour later, carrying a crew of volunteers and a cargo bay full of experimental quantum sensors. Morrison's ship moved through space like a ghost, using every stealth technique in the human arsenal to avoid detection. The first sensor placement went smoothly, but the second triggered a massive response from the Vakari fleet. Bioships converged on the Lightning from all directions, their organic weapons firing streams of acid and bioplasma that ate through the ship's armor like it was paper. Morrison managed to plant the third sensor, but his ship was dying around him. All crew to escape pods, he ordered as the Lightning's hull began to buckle under the assault. I'm going to ram this thing into their formation and see how they like nuclear fire. The explosion lit up space for millions of kilometers and took out 17 bioships, but more importantly, it provided Chun with the final piece of data she needed to map the Vakari neural network. Admiral Sullivan studied the tactical projection that Chun had created, showing the quantum connections between individual bioships and their queen. So, if we can disrupt these connection points, the entire fleet becomes uncoordinated. Exactly, Chun replied, but there's a problem. The only way to generate enough quantum interference is to detonate our entire nuclear arsenal at specific points in space simultaneously. We're talking about using every warhead in the fleet. Sullivan nodded slowly, understanding the implications. That leaves us with conventional weapons only for the final assault on the Queen ship. Rodriguez stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. Admiral, my crew and I volunteer to carry the nuclear devices to the target coordinates. The Vengeance can handle the mission. The room fell silent as everyone realized what he was proposing: a one-way trip into the heart of the Vakari fleet with no hope of return. But Sullivan had seen that look in too many brave faces over the years. Captain, your proposal is noted and approved, she said quietly. Prepare your ship for departure. We launch the final assault in 18 hours. As the command staff dispersed to make their final preparations, Ambassador Zethara approached Admiral Sullivan with tears streaming down her face. Why, she asked simply, why are your people willing to die for us? Sullivan looked out through the command center's windows at the human ships, preparing for battle. Each one carried hundreds of warriors who knew they might not see another sunrise. Because that's what we do, Ambassador. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's what makes us human. The assault on the Vakari Queen ship began 18 hours later with the largest space battle in human history. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the attack from her command ship, while 3 separate battle groups moved into position around the massive enemy formation. Captain Rodriguez led the main assault force straight through the center while the remaining destroyer squadrons attacked from multiple angles to create confusion in the Valkyrie ranks. The Queen ship itself was a nightmare made real, stretching across space like a living mountain covered in weapon ports that glowed with malevolent green light. Smaller bioships swarmed around it like insects protecting their hive, but these creatures were each the size of human cruisers, and armed with weapons that could dissolve steel in seconds. Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UNS Vengeance, watching as his fleet charged into hell itself. The first wave of enemy fire lit up space around them, streams of acidic biomatter and energy bursts that turned two destroyers into clouds of burning debris. Before they could even return fire, all ships maintain formation. Rodriguez ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. We need to get those nuclear devices to the target coordinates or this whole operation fails. Chief Engineer Tony Miller was performing miracles in the engine room, keeping the Vengeance running despite the massive damage. The ship was taking enemy acid, had eaten through 3 decks, and the life support systems were failing, but Miller refused to let his ship die. Captain, the port engine is gone and we're losing atmosphere on deck 7 through 12, Miller reported over the intercom. But we can still make the target zone if we push the remaining engines beyond Red Lanido. Rodriguez replied without hesitation. We didn't come this far to fail now. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun's virus weapon was beginning to show effects across the battlefield. The quantum interference devices that Morrison had sacrificed his life to place were disrupting the Valkyrie hive mind communication network. Individual bioships started responding slower to threats, and their coordinated attacks became sloppy and predictable, but the Queen herself proved immune to the disruption. Her massive bulk pulsed with energy as she began broadcasting psychic screams that drove the nearby Valkyrie into suicidal frenzy. The creatures stopped caring about their own survival and threw themselves at the human ships with reckless abandon. Colonel Harper led the boarding action with 2,000 Marines in powered armor. The plan was desperate beyond belief. They would use assault pods to penetrate the Queen ship's hull and fight their way to her neural center, where a specialized nuclear device would be planted to destroy her. From within, the interior of the Queen ship was worse than any nightmare Harper had ever imagined. The corridors were made of living tissue that pulsed and breathed. Around them, walls secreted acidic substances that ate through anything they touched, and the air itself was toxic enough to kill an unprotected human in minutes. Stay together and keep moving, Harper ordered as his Marines advanced through the organic maze. Every surface in this thing is trying to kill us, so don't touch anything you don't have. 2 Sergeant Dan Cooper's squad was the first to encounter the Queen's internal defenses. Creatures that looked like a cross between spiders and jellyfish dropped from the ceiling, wielding bioweapons that fired streams of digestive enzymes. Cooper watched in horror as one of his men was dissolved alive before he could bring his plasma rifle to bear contact. Left side, Cooper shouted into his helmet radio, these things are using some kind of acid projectors. Focus fire and don't let them get close. The Marines adapted with typical human pragmatism. When their advanced weapons proved less effective than hoped, they switched to thermite charges and improvised explosives. The Queen ship's organic construction made it vulnerable to fire and extreme heat in ways that CONVNTIO NAL armor was not. Harper pushed deeper into the ship, following Chun's bioscanner readings toward what should be the creature's central nervous system. The corridors grew narrower and more twisted as they advanced, and the Marines began finding evidence of the Queen's feeding habits. The walls were lined with processing chambers where the remains of countless alien civilizations were being broken down into raw organic matter. Harper saw fragments of Calorian crystal technology mixed with the bones of species he didn't recognize, all being dissolved and absorbed by the massive creature. This thing has been consuming entire worlds, Cooper said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Look at all this stuff. It's like a museum of dead civilizations. Keep moving, Harper replied. We're going to make sure it doesn't add Earth to its collection. The mission's success hinged on Corporal Julie Martinez reaching the Queen's neural center with the nuclear device. Martinez was the smallest member of the team and the only one who could fit through the narrow biotubes that led to the creature's brain. She crawled through passages that contracted around her like a living throat while digestive fluids dripped from above. Martinez could hear the Queen's thoughts as she got closer to the neural center, a constant stream of hunger and hatred that threatened to drive her insane. The creature's mind was alien beyond human comprehension, focused entirely on consumption and growth, with no room for mercy or understanding. Almost there, Martinez reported through gritted teeth. One can see some kind of chamber ahead with what looks like a massive brain structure. The neural center was a cavern filled with pulsing bioelectric tissue that sparked with energy every few seconds. Martinez planted the nuclear device and started the timer, but as she tried to retreat, the Queen's immune system activated. The walls began closing in, secreting paralytic toxins that made her movements sluggish. Harper, this is Martinez, she transmitted weakly. I've planted the device, but I'm not going to make it out. The thing's biology is shutting down my armor systems. Martinez, hold your position. We're coming to get you, Harper responded, but they both knew it was too late. The immune response was too strong, and the corridors were already sealing themselves. Tell my family I died fighting the good fight, Martinez said as her suit's life support began failing. And give these bugs hell for me. Meanwhile, in space, the battle had reached its climax. The human fleet was down to less than half strength, but they had successfully penetrated the Queen ship's outer defenses. Rodriguez had pushed the Vengeance to its absolute limits, and the ship was dying around him. But they were almost to the target coordinates, sir. We have multiple hull breaches, and the reactor is going critical. His tactical officer reported. We need to abandon ship. Negative, Rodriguez replied firmly. We're going to complete this mission even if it kills us. All hands prepare for ramming speed. Admiral Sullivan watched from her command ship as the Vengeance accelerated toward the Queen ship's most vulnerable point. The massive bio-vessel tried to evade, but its size worked against it, and Rodriguez's dying ship struck home just as Martinez's nuclear device detonated. From within, the explosion was visible from 3 star systems away as nuclear fire consumed the Queen ship from both inside and out. The creature's death scream was broadcast across quantum space, disrupting Vakari hive minds throughout the galaxy and causing millions of bioships to simply stop functioning. But the victory came at a terrible price. The human fleet was reduced to scattered remnants, and thousands of Marines had died inside the Queen ship when it exploded. Admiral Sullivan looked at her tactical display showing the few surviving ships and felt the weight of every life lost. Colonel Harper survived the Queen ship's destruction by pure luck. His assault pod was blown clear by the explosion and recovered by one of the few remaining destroyers. As he was pulled from the wreckage, he could see the shattered remains of the massive creature drifting through space. Like a broken monument to humanity's determination, the surviving Vakari fleets, cut off from their Queen's guidance, began retreating toward the Galactic Rim. Some ships continued fighting, but without coordination they were easily defeated by the remaining human forces. The immediate threat was over, but both species had paid a price that would be remembered for generations. Ambassador Zethara stood in the ruins of the command center, looking out at the debris field that had once been the most powerful force in the galaxy. She finally understood why humans had answered her people's call for help. They fought not because they loved war, but because they could not stand by and watch innocent beings suffer when they had the power to intervene. The war was over, but the cost of victory would echo through history as a reminder of what happened when someone threatened the innocent in front of humanity. The aftermath of the Queen ship's destruction left both fleets drifting in space, surrounded by debris that had once been the most feared force in the galaxy. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her heavily damaged command ship, looking out at the scattered remains of her fleet. Only 7 ships remained operational out of the 52 that had begun the final assault. The cost of victory had been higher than anyone could have imagined. Captain Rodriguez was gone along with the UNS Vengeance, and most of her crew. Commander Morrison had sacrificed himself to plant the quantum sensors. Lieutenant Foster had died holding Kepler-7, and Corporal Martinez had given her life to plant the nuclear device that killed the Queen. List of heroes seemed endless, but so did the list of the dead. Ambassador Zethara contacted the human fleet from her sanctuary ship, her voice heavy with emotion. Admiral Sullivan, I do not know how my people can ever repay the debt we owe to humanity. You came when we called for help, And you gave everything to save us. Sullivan's reply was simple: we didn't do this for payment. Ambassador, we did it because it was the right thing to do when innocent beings are threatened. Those who can fight have a duty to protect them, but the war was not over yet. Long-range sensors detected Vakari fleets throughout the galaxy still moving toward inhabited systems, even though their queen was dead. Dr. Chun, working frantically in her damaged laboratory, discovered that the smaller bioships could survive for weeks without direct commands from the hive mind. But they would continue following their last instructions to consume and destroy. We need to stop them before they reach the other Calorian worlds. Chun reported to Admiral Sullivan, the virus one developed can be transmitted through quantum communication arrays, but we would need enormous power to broadcast it across the entire galaxy. Sullivan studied the tactical display showing Vakari fleets converging on dozens of worlds. How much power are we talking about? Doctor, enough to drain a planet's fusion core. Chun replied quietly. We would need to sacrifice an entire world to generate the transmission. The choice fell to the surviving humans and Calorians on the Sara Prime. The planet's fusion core could provide the necessary power, but the process would destroy the world completely. Commander Jake Morrison volunteered to remain behind with a skeleton crew to ensure the transmission succeeded, knowing that escape would be impossible once the core overload began. I've lost too many good people already, Morrison said when Admiral Sullivan tried to talk him out of it. But if staying behind means saving millions of innocent lives, then that's what we're going to do. Colonel Harper led the final ground defense as Vakari forces that had been cut off from the Queen tried to prevent the transmission. The remaining Marines fought with desperate courage, using every weapon and tactic they had learned. During the long campaign, the Colonel himself held the main power station for 3 hours against overwhelming odds, while Dr. Chun completed her viral upload. The enhanced virus spread through the Vakari quantum network at the speed of light, causing catastrophic system failures in bioships across the galaxy. Millions of creatures that had terrorized civilizations for countless generations simply stopped functioning as their neural networks collapsed. The few survivors fled toward the galactic rim, where they would pose no further threat to inhabited worlds. Morrison's final transmission came as the Sara Prime's core began its catastrophic failure. Admiral, this is Morrison. The upload is complete, and the planet is about to go tell everyone back home that we finished the job. The explosion that consumed the Sara Prime was visible from neighboring star systems as the planet's entire mass was converted to energy. The sacrifice of one world had saved countless others, but the price seemed almost too high to bear. Admiral Sullivan led the evacuation of the surviving population to New the Sara, a world that the Calorians had designated as their new capital. The refugees from both species worked together to build a new society from the ruins of their old ones. Human engineering techniques were combined with Calorian medical technology to create cities that neither species could have built alone. Ambassador Zathara, now serving as the first Calorian military advisor, helped establish defensive protocols that would protect both civilizations from future threats. She had learned the hard way that sometimes violence was necessary to preserve peace, and that those who could fight had a responsibility to protect those who could not. The memorial wall on New the Sara listed over 40,000 human casualties from the war, with Admiral Sullivan's final message carved in both human and Calorian languages. When someone calls for help, you answer. That's what makes us human. The words became a rallying cry for the new alliance between the species, but the impact of humanity's actions reached far beyond the immediate survivors. Word of the war spread throughout the galaxy, carried by refugee ships and diplomatic missions. Dozens of species that had never heard of Earth suddenly wanted to know more about these strange creatures who would travel across space to fight for strangers. The Altarian Republic sent a delegation offering alliance and mutual defense treaties. The Centauri Federation opened trade negotiations and shared their most advanced technologies. The Sirius Collective invited human military advisors to help train their defense forces against future threats. Dr. Chun established the Galactic Defense Research Institute, combining human military science with alien technologies to develop better ways to protect innocent civilizations. She worked with scientists from 12 different species to create early warning networks and rapid response protocols that would prevent another Vakari-style genocide. Colonel Harper founded the first integrated military academy where humans and aliens trained together, learning to fight as a unified force. The academy's motto became "Hold the line" in honor of all those who had died protecting others. His first graduating class included both human Marines and Calorian volunteers who had overcome their species' pacifist nature to become warriors. The Terran Defense Network was expanded to include alien volunteers for the first time, with species from across the galaxy requesting permission to serve alongside human forces. The diversity of the new military reflected humanity's growing role as the galaxy's unofficial protector against existential threats. Admiral Sullivan retired from active service but continued to serve as an advisor to the Galactic Defense Council. Her strategic insights and understanding of human military doctrine became legendary among military planners of all species. She often spoke about the importance of being willing to sacrifice for others even when the odds seemed impossible. Captain Ben Davis, who had survived the war despite his dangerous reconnaissance missions, became the first human to command a mixed species fleet. His ship, the UN's Unity, carried crews from 6 different worlds and served as a symbol of the new cooperation between formerly isolated civilizations. Ambassador Zethara worked tirelessly to build bridges between human aggression and alien pacifism, helping other species understand that violence used to protect the innocent was not the same as violence used for conquest. Her diplomatic efforts led to the formation of the Galactic Protection Alliance. The war's end marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. Earth became the unofficial capital of interspecies military cooperation. While maintaining its commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves, human warships patrolled trade routes and defended peaceful worlds, while human advisors helped other species develop their own defensive capabilities. The Vakari threat was finally over, but its legacy lived on in the form of stronger alliances and better defenses. The galaxy had learned that even the most overwhelming enemy could be defeated if good beings were willing to stand together and fight for what was right. Years later, when new threats emerged from the dark spaces between stars, they would find a galaxy that was no longer defenseless. The lessons learned from the Vakari War had created a network of mutual defense and cooperation that spanned hundreds of worlds and dozens of species, all united by the simple human principle that when someone calls for help, you answer.